Is Ukraine facing an infantry crisis? And just what is it like to be an infantryman on a battlefield dominated by drones? And just how is it worse for Russia? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Slap that subscribe button. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is some reporting from the Kiev Independent, one of Ukraine's, independent news sources. And it is a wild series of interviews where they basically start from interviewing an individual infantryman and take it all the way up to high-level commanders to understand what is happening to the Ukrainian infantry, right? And they profile a Ukrainian infantryman, a 54-year-old man named Ruslan Kalaya, right? Who, again, his call sign is Kalina. And they say he's only been on one combat mission since he volunteered. One 146-day long combat rotation, right? And he is an ex-con, a prison soldier who was convicted of a nonviolent offense, who was assigned to Ukraine's 93rd Mech Brigade, where he had to conduct a 15-kilometer trek to a zero-line position east of Konstantinivka in Donetsk. Actually, we were not too far off from Konstantinivka when I was in Ukraine in November. And he went there March 11th and didn't come out until August. And he was there for nearly 5 months in a tiny dugout under fire on every single day. And as spring and summer passed, he found himself being like, hey, when do I leave? And this is part of the new reality of being an infantryman in the Ukraine war, because the primary killing tool are drones, reconnaissance drones that look for infantrymen, and of course the strike drones that eliminate their positions, right? And the insane part is that essentially this war has slowly become one devoid of infantry, where infantry are actually not even the frontline forces. Now, for example, they interviewed a company commander, a 24-year-old junior lieutenant who joined in 2023 in the counteroffensive. He talked about how back then, before the dawn of these FPV drones, that infantrymen performed what he called normal infantry work, which is assaulting and defending in fortified or entrenched positions, right? And occasionally an FPV drone would be like an augmented strike package. He says now most of the time the infantrymen are focused not only on the ground, on the enemy directly on the battlefield, but also on the sky, how to detect drones and so forth. So this is listening to the way these people talk about being in the infantry. For example, Taras said, when a soldier is about to take up a position, when he needs to move up to it, psychological support is provided to him. He's told, my friend, everything will be all right. We understand this task is difficult and it will take a lot of time to get through it, but you can handle it. We trained you for this. We're giving you everything you need so that you can get there. And that's because infiltrating, getting to an assigned position, is in some ways the riskiest part. Right? Because you have to be exposed to these reconnaissance drones, sometimes for kilometer after kilometer. And then if you can somehow make it to your assigned position, it's often no more than a small dugout and trench or basement. And sometimes you stay there for weeks or months at a time. Well, literally they are in a 2-soldier pair. While one soldier sleeps, the other is on the lookout for attacks that mostly come from the skies, right? For example, one interview, right? They said, first they swarm us with FPV drones and drop bombs. Sometimes they use gas as well. This is another infantryman from the 93rd Prisoner Battalion. Then when everything is quiet and they think no one is left, they come in to clear the position. We hear voices. It's usually 2 of them and the firefight starts. This is insane. This is how the Russians are making these incremental advances, where the positions are detected, FPV drones and other strike packages hit the position until they think that they've been killed, and then the Russians send their own 2-man team to try to seize the position. They said this is a daily routine, right? And a battalion commander they interviewed who said at first soldiers are afraid, but in order to speak candidly, the battalion commander refused to give his name and his unit, but he says, at first the soldiers are afraid. He doesn't move forward. He hears the drones and may panic, but by the 5th day, he begins to understand what's happening. He learns the terrain, recognizes where the FPV drones are, where the Mavics are, where the supply points are. In other words, he adapts to the reality of war. But the problem is that these Russian drone, the profusion of Russian drones across the battlefield mean that essential supplies, food, water, fuel, ammunition, have to be brought to infantry positions by drones, either heavy bombers or unmanned ground vehicles. And the Russian forces still managed to be successful destroying these logistics threads, meaning that the guys at the position often lack food or water or other basic supplies. So literally, they may not even be able, they may be defeated by simply running out of food and water, right? And I mean, imagine 5 months in a hole, in a basement, in a bombed out trench. And like, I mean, this is insane. They say, quote, the person is cut off from civilization. They don't exactly become a savage, but they perceive the world differently when they come back from rotation. Absolutely insane stuff, right? Now, what's also preposterous is that the 93rd is actually one of the best manned battalions. It actually has the infantry it needs, because many other infantry units, look at this, almost all other brigades are less fortunate, right, than the 93rd, which has significant manpower. Because, let's see if I can find it, the number of infantry in a lot of these brigades, several battalion commanders who spoke to the Kiev Independent reported fewer than 10 combat effective infantrymen in their entire battalion, with numbers sometimes as low as 0. They say, but right now I'm receiving the same orders I did in 2022, but there's only one difference. I have no infantry. In place of infantry, I have drivers, artillerymen, and cooks, right? What does that mean? That means that Ukraine's infantry shortage means that a lot of these defensive lines aren't lines at all. They are just sort of pockmarked individual positions, a little basement here, a dugout here in a small crater, just pockmarked throughout the battlefield, right? And that these individual positions are manned by only 2 or 3 people with hundreds of meters between adjacent positions. There is no support by fire position. It doesn't exist, right? Russia, of course, exploits these gaps by pushing these tiny little groups of infantry in, because if there's a massive infantry, it gets detected by drones and attacked and destroyed. So what you have is battle lines themselves don't exist. You have a massive no man's land between firmly Ukrainian-held positions, and you have firmly Russian-held positions, and you have kilometer after kilometer after kilometer of nothing, of emptiness, right? And in that emptiness, you have pockmarked little tiny places where Ukrainian soldiers are hiding and where Russians need to try to infiltrate. And this is insane. And it's one of the reasons why there was a dramatic but kind of not effective breach operation near the town of Drobopolivka in Donetsk, right? Remember, on the map, it looked like a big 10-kilometer breakthrough. But as we talked about, it was just a few hundred Russian infantrymen 15 kilometers behind the zero line in just a few days. But it was almost immediately detected and sort of choked off by essentially the Ukrainian QRF, the Azov Brigade. And this, like, it's hard to even call that a breakthrough, because you didn't break through anything. You passed deeper into no man's land and at times got through Ukrainian lines, but there weren't lines to pass through. Like, it's hard to understand. This is more like perfusion, you know, more like mixing of gases, right? Like oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? Like one might sit atop the other, but there is a huge area where they're just kind of intermixed. And the commanders essentially say Russia can do this because, frankly, the Russians can afford to lose a ton of people. Right? One brigade commander says the enemy does not count its losses. That's why it can achieve success. If it keeps attacking relentlessly and pays no attention to casualties, literally stepping over bodies of their own comrades, eventually there will be a breakthrough. Nothing can stop it. And one of the things that these commanders say often is that commanders remain committed to the philosophy that infantry cannot be replaced by drones. But meanwhile, many sectors of the front line are already held by drones exclusively. Again, units with 0 combat effective infantrymen simply are effective. Like, they're empty positions. They say the drone infantry officers, drones have defeated us. It's time to admit it. The infantry, officially the mechanized forces, are ceasing to be the main branch of the armed forces, and that now it's simply drones, right? And when asked how to improve this infantry crisis, Commander said, we need to support the rank and file with well-organized logistics, well-prepared positions, and proper training in the field. The drones for surveilling the area around the zero line and striking Russian assault groups long before they get to Ukrainian positions. But also, commanders have to understand the reality, because as they point out here, a lot of times commanders simply lie to their bosses about what is happening, right? And oftentimes subordinate commanders said it's common to have only a dozen or fewer infantrymen per kilometer of front line, individual positions barely manned, and that that these units simply have to say, hey, we just lie, right? What happens, right? Specifically, the Ukrainian general staff does not approve withdrawals from any position, instead ordering commanders on the ground to hold even the worst positions at all cost. But after withdrawal or regrouping, you don't try to take a better position. They say it's immediately retake, retake, retake. Even if you don't have enough infantry, you're ordered to reassign tankers, logisticians, or medics into infantry roles. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And it's not uncommon for a commander lacking infantry to properly man a line to just fake positions which are not actually occupied by Ukrainian soldiers, meaning the gaps in the battlefield get deeper, right? They're often described under the umbrella of Sovietness systematically, but it leads to, again, excess losses because some units actually have forward deployed infantry and some don't. And so infantry may find themselves forward of the real front line. And this is a fundamental problem in militaries where generals want their troops held to high standards. They want their troops held to, and that means that when a commander says, hey, I can't do this, some commanders go, no, yes, you can, and you will. You're just being kind of a wimp. And that's true sometimes. But the problem is that some other times you have to go to your commander, say, I can't do this. And a battalion commander goes, okay, let's make a new plan, right? What can we do? And this is what people talk about, like officership and being operating at the speed of trust. And it's one of the reasons why the Army, the U.S. Army, promotes a lot of these like draconian officers who like scream at subordinates. Some of them throw childlike temper tantrums. I've seen it. I've served for battalion commanders, men pushing 40 who have literal childlike meltdowns. And they do so because they feel that gets results. But it doesn't get results. What it gets is lies. The staff just learn to lie to the commander, or not lie explicitly, but conceal the reality beneath like true facts, but cherry-picked facts about reality. And when you do that, what you do is you blind your commander, who then tells his superiors, his commanders, a reality that is fake. And they tell their boss that reality is fake. And so what you end up with is decision makers who simply create this completely fake reality. And it's probably one of the reasons why the infantry commanders report getting these absurd orders to hold positions at all costs, because they believe that there are robust infantry manned positions and a stable, steady front line. And until these commanders are willing to hear the truth from the bottom and are willing to accept the truth as it is, and you're going to continue to have these kinds of problems, of crises. But the other reality is we can see how this is another example of war following politics, because the discussion, the core issue at hand is for Ukraine, right? Even the U.S. is sitting here pressuring Ukraine, saying, listen, you've got to recognize Russian territorial control, which means every square kilometer of Ukrainian territory that a Russian infantryman seizes is territory that odds on will end up in Russian hands for decades to come. But the problem is, again, it's short-term thinking. So yes, politically, Ukraine needs to hold every inch of territory, but when you make that short-term decision, what you do is you pay a longer-term price, because as we've seen, Russia has had the offer, right? The White House has pretty clearly shown to Russia that they are willing to coerce Ukraine to accept territorial losses, particularly if Ukraine's also willing to if Russia is willing to accept some kind of security guarantee, which is a really good deal for Russia if its goal is taking territory. But if its goal is to vassalize and subordinate the Ukrainian government, then territory is immaterial, right? Whether or not Ukraine holds a couple hundred square miles of farm fields in eastern Ukraine is actually kind of irrelevant, because Russia's real objective is the political defeat of Ukraine. And it can only do that by grinding Ukrainian armed forces into dust. And the reality is that preserving manpower should probably be the armed forces' priority over holding territory. Because again, if Ukraine or Ukraine's government becomes like Belarus, puppets of the Russian state, then in effect, the Russian armed forces will have conquered every square inch of Ukraine. Guys, if you appreciate my content and you want to support me and keep me independent, you can do so by subscribing at combatvetnews.com. This is functionally my Patreon or my Substack, where twice a week we drop uncensored combat videos as well as Q&As for members. A huge thank you to our Colonel tier members, guys like Henry Russier, Ida Sky, Chris Rossi, AL90, Sergey Zinchenko, D. Stewart, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.